Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined Monsieur Rigaud as he travels the Vortex and arrive at episode 565. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn. How's everybody doing this
How's
week?
it going?
Did you guys do anything
not too
fun and
bad.
exciting? Did you go see anything? Watch any shows? I know I did something that Sean did, but I'll let him go first.
What did I do?
You went and saw a play.
Oh, I did go see a play.
Musical.
That was work, so I don't tend to think of it as...
Wait, you were working?
Yeah, I'm the archivist because of
So were you doing video then?
shows. Yep.
Okay. Very good.
Not that it's much work, but
Well, and it's kind of fun because you get to come see the shows. So.
it does, yes. So Glenn and I got to go see 9 to 5, the musical.
Man, that was so good.
Fun. Just a delight. Good music and songs and a lot of energy. And
I tell you, I've been to a few recently. I saw Something Rotten, which I enjoyed, and I saw West Side Story, which I also enjoyed. But of those more recent ones that I've seen at TCT, this one, like you said, it really felt like it had the energy, and it really felt like an even bigger than production that I had seen at TCT for a long time. So
Wow.
I was very, very impressed. It takes a few liberties, but it sticks pretty close to the story of the movie. Of course, there's a lot of original songs in it, all written by Dolly Parton, which was kind of fun. But for the most part, the story is the same as the movie. And now I'm itching to go watch the movie again. So a lot of fun.
Nice.
What else, Sean? Did you do anything else? I'm plumb out of things. I did finish Only Murders in the Building, which I thought ended really, really well this year. And I did
What about
finish.
the ending of Ahsoka?
I did finish Ahsoka too, and really, really enjoyed that. Sean, are you caught
I
up?
finished Ahsoka as well.
Yay! What'd you guys think?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
Very, very good.
Um,
Phenomenal lightsaber battles.
Yes.
I enjoyed the pacing. Which, interestingly enough, I guess the lightsabers may be tied in with the reason these look so much better is Disney apparently has finally figured out the battery pack thing.
Yeah.
Because they went to this system where they were actually able to illuminate the sabers on set,
Mm-hmm.
and they thought that it would save a bunch of time instead of having to go and rotoscope and animate them in post. Unfortunately, it required a bunch of wires to run, up the sleeve of the costume and the big heavy batteries. And then apparently, in the case of Obi-Wan, the blue light from his saber did something that it affects the 4K cameras.
Oh no.
And so it was like blowing everything out, and they didn't realize it until, they got into the editing room and went, what the heck? Which is why all of the Obi-Wan fight scenes are so super dark.
Dark. Yeah, I noticed
Because
that.
they had to go back and turn the gain down in order to compensate for the fact that blue light was just doing something. And I think they have it fixed now. But
Yeah.
yeah, apparently the
Well,
new
notice
sabers have batteries. That,
They still. Let's not simplify this too much. They still go in a rotoscope and put the blade in there on those, but now the stunt
But now they
swords.
have lighting effects.
Yeah,
on
the stunt
Right.
swords light up so that the lighting effect bounces back off the actor's face and the environment around them. So
correct.
but yes, they certainly have got it minimalized so that they can be completely free of the wiring, like you were talking
They
about.
even figured out the blue.
Yeah,
They waited till the end, but they figured out the blue.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, just super good. Really, really enjoyed it. Really, I'm a little, I don't know if I want to say unsatisfied with the ending.
Obviously, it's not an ending.
Well, that's just
so,
it. I
yeah.
think if that were the end, yeah, I would be unsatisfied as well. I like it because it feels like a Star Wars film, because it feels like this is the end of the first film.
Yeah.
And then the next season will be the beginning of the next film. So it just still has that feel.
Yeah, I agree. It's very movie vibe. Love the practical effects and creatures and just so much of it that felt like, wow, this is Star Wars. And could I be any more in love with David Tennant than I already am?
This is the year of David Tennant for sure.
Oh,
Yeah,
it
really
totally
is. I really liked how they, the stormtroopers showed up earlier, and everyone was claiming what they thought the stormtroopers were, and they proved everyone wrong, but still gave them that at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't know what the story behind that is.
Oh, everyone online was saying, "Oh, these are dead troopers. They're zombies."
Not yet.
And no,
they
they
were.
weren't. And then they became them. Which I thought was a nice little dig of, you're wrong again.
Yeah.
But here you go. I'll give it to you anyways.
No, I actually hadn't heard that. So,
because how many times has fandom gone, oh, it's this, and they're always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like the speculation on the masked guy.
Yeah,
that being nothing.
Yeah, it ended up being absolutely nothing. I was a bit disappointed with that. I thought they could have.
I was so happy about that. It didn't need to be anything.
Yeah.
I was disappointed that Glenn was not correct. But beyond that, I was happy it wound up being nothing because
they wouldn't have had time for that in the story.
Yeah, it didn't really need to be. And I think if they wanted to do that, they could have sowed those seeds a little further than they did.
Well, and then stretched out that whole beginning part and made it longer.
Well, no, I mean, they wouldn't have had to done that this season, and they wouldn't have had to dispatch that character. They could have.
Oh, yeah.
They could have kept the mystery into next season, but that's all right.
If we get a next season, it might just be wrapped up in that movie he's going to do.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I feel like we need another season before we get a movie. I feel like there's still too much unfinished story, specifically with where it kind of sort of implies that Balin is heading, that we're going to the Mortis arc. And that's the part that I'm not sure I'm happy about, because that was not a stretch of Clone Wars that I particularly enjoyed, were those handful of episodes.
And what's so unfortunate is the fact that actor has passed. So I'm not sure how even they're going to tackle that storyline if they do in the future. Yeah. It would almost have to be extended media in order to truly tell whatever story he was going to tell.
I mean, you'd have to recast him, unfortunately.
Which I don't know if, I wouldn't like that.
Time will tell.
Yep.
Did you guys watch or do anything else?
We also finished Good Omens this week.
We have one episode left, I believe.
Super good. Super enjoyable. More David Tennant awesomeness. That's about it.
Keith, what about you? Anything else?
We watched the first episode of Loki, which I really enjoyed. It really just picks up and runs with what's going on. It's really hitting the ground running, and I'm liking that aspect of it.
How did I forget about that? That was such a good first episode.
Yeah.
That really feels like, well, of course, Loki, I think, still is one of the best things they've done on television.
Mm-hmm.
And this just proves that show is good, that they've got it right. They've got whatever formula everything else had. They still have it. So.
Mm-hmm.
We also watched that, I guess. I didn't think about it.
It was such a good episode that we completely forgot about it.
No, it's not so much that as it was just, I've been so busy with everything that's going on at work that shows, that's just our normal thing. So it wasn't really, but I do remember making the comment, we were wondering, is like, is there a recap anywhere for season 1? Because I remember bits and pieces of it, but I don't know that I really remember how we left it. And it came up as previously on, and it kind of gave you just enough, but not really an in-depth one. And then the episode ended, and I started laughing. And they said, "What?" I was like, I suddenly remembered now. I have no idea what's going on in Loki. but I'm enjoying the ride so much that I don't care. And that was kind of the vibe for me all throughout season 1. So I didn't need a recap because I went into season 2 and went, I have no idea what's going on.
Oh, Loki's on my screen? Okay. I'll watch it. Well, if you do want to recap, the Marvel's Legends does a decent job at least recapping the TVA and variants.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And maybe
we'll look that up before next week.
Yeah.
So
kind of gives you a nice refresher.
You've only watched the Loki series one time then, Keith or Sean?
Yes.
Keith, how many times have you? Oh, same?
Only once, yeah. How many times have you watched it?
Well, 4.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Well,
really?
I watched it the first time, then we went back and watched it when Holly started watching, and then we went back, and then that was one that Caitlin was at school at the time, so we went back and started watching it again with her. And then I watched it one more time before knowing that the next season was coming out about a month ago. So
Sarah and I had discussed wanting to rewatch it in advance of this, but just never found the time.
Yeah.
I was like, who has time to rewatch stuff?
Well, I had time back a month or two ago, and now that we're in October, now that we're into fall, I've got all kinds of crazy stuff going on. But
it's someone who has grown-up children who don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time with them and watch what they want to watch.
I am now enjoying what you guys. When I had kids that were little and you guys had no kids, we're like reversed. I'm like enjoying this. Yeah. I can just go wherever I want, do whatever I want, whenever I want, and not worry about little ones anymore. And you guys are now in that phase of little ones. So
I've watched so many YouTube videos of a guy walking through Spirit of Halloween.
Actually, that'd be kind of fun.
It's pretty good, actually.
I think I'd watch that without a kid.
This guy travels around the country and just visits Spirit of Halloween's. Last year he came here.
This really?
Year he didn't.
Oh, yeah. Well, it hasn't changed much this year. It's just new merchandise.
Yeah, that's the thing, is every year they have new animatronics. And so, or predominantly new animatronics. So he goes around and sees how all the stores are set up, and you get to see all the different animatronics and if they work.
Yeah. Ours are all still working. I was just in there over the weekend, and they're all still working. So
we went in over the weekend too, and Liam was very disappointed that they took down one of them.
Oh, which one did they take down? I didn't notice.
Inside the mausoleum, there's supposed to be 2.
Oh.
The Scarecrow and the guy with daggers.
You're right.
And yep, the dagger guy's gone.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I didn't even notice that until you just brought it up. But you're right.
Oh, he noticed right away because he's been watching all these videos.
Yeah.
We've gone there 3 times now because he likes it so much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've only been there twice so far this season. Mostly because they keep sending me 20% off coupons.
He really wants to buy one of those. And I'm like, they're expensive.
Yeah,
I'm not going to buy one of those to set it up.
Not sure on that. Well, Keith, I
did watch
Go ahead.
a Halloween movie, too.
Oh, what'd you watch?
I watched Trick or Treat.
Oh, how is that? That's on my watch list.
I wasn't overly impressed.
Oh, no.
It's structured really cleverly and really well done in that manner. But because it's told non-linearly and jumping between stories, but it sticks with the story throughout its completion pretty much for the most part, and then it kind of backs up and goes to a different plot thread of all these things that are happening all at the same time, which that part is done really well. It's just the stories themselves were kind of okay. There's a couple of them that were really cool, and a couple of them were like, this doesn't even make that much sense. Why and how is this even happening? Yeah. Brian Cox is unrecognizable in this movie.
Oh, really?
We are going on a journey, a very long journey, through the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. Every week, we are looking at a new book, talking about Terrence Dicks, Malcolm Hulk, and all our Doctor Who novelization friends. Whatever you do, keep turning the pages. This is Jason Miller of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast, a member of the Direction Point Podcast Network, and you are listening to Traveling the Vortex, a Direction Point podcast.
They all say, who is Doctor Who? This is Tim Trelaw.
This is David J. Howe.
I'm Peter Purvis.
I am Sadie Miller.
This is Lauren Cornelius.
Larry, it's Fraser.
For all things in the Doctor Who collecting world and beyond, the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. I'm Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I've been collecting for 42 years. You're listening to Traveling the Vortex on the Direction Point Podcast Network.
Well, the other thing I did was I listened to the Fifth Doctor Adventures in the Nights, which is my something new 2-minute review. So this is a box set of 2 different Fifth Doctor stories that don't connect at all, other than it's the Fifth Doctor, Tegan, and Nyssa all together. The first one, the story itself is really good. It's called The Pursuit of the Night Jar, and it's about the Doctor and Nyssa and Tegan land on this spaceship, and it's on this mercy mission in the middle of this war, and it's this big future historical event that the Doctor is very familiar with, and then things don't go quite right and go awry, and the Doctor has to take a bigger role in the story than he anticipates, and the reason why is very clever. I don't want to spoil that, but it's really good. Nyssa and Tegan get a lot to do in it and are fantastic, and it really builds up the relationship that I think has kind of just been discovered in the audios between the two of them, because they seem to be really, really tight in the story. And then the other story is called, I just blanked on the name of it. It's set in 82 about a rock band in Poland, and kind of during their kind of political turmoil that was happening at the time. And things kind of get wonky, and the Doctor obviously gets involved because it's political turmoil. But it's an okay story. It's nowhere near as good as the first one. It's also half the length of the first one. The first one's a 4-part half-hour stories. The second one's only a 2-part, so it feels a little bit more rushed, but at the same time the story doesn't feel like it warrants more than that. So it's a kind of a weird dichotomy of this box set being the first half really fantastic and the second half being just okay. And that's my something new, slightly longer than 2-minute review.
2-minute-ish.
10 seconds over, not bad.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth listening to.
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space, in a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts,
Eric Gulbranson, Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
Explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse on shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point Network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to Traveling the Vortex.
Hi, I'm Rupert Booth.
I am known as Paul Ferry.
And my name is Barry Williams.
Together, we host Time Ram.
Time Ram's a cruel mistress.
It's a random number generator.
That also.
We roll a number from 1 to 13, and that's our Doctor. Then 1 to 300 for the story, and then we ram them together.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Cruel, I tell you.
Time Ram, putting the wrong Doctors in the wrong stories, so you don't have to.
You're listening to Traveling the Vortex.
All right, well, here's the part where we talk about some upcoming conventions. A couple of things we've already talked about. Oktoberfest 2023 Collision is coming up October 21st in Plainfield, Indiana in the U.S., and the big guest there is Sophie Aldred. And if you are able to make it to that, make sure that you say hello to Larry Van Mersbergen. He is the host of the Doctor Who Collectors podcast, and he is also in charge of Direction Point podcast, Doctor Who Podcast Network, which we are a part of. And he is, I think, doing a collectors panel at the show. So be sure to tell him hi if you see him. Also coming up, Saratoga Comic-Con happening in Saratoga Springs, New York on November 18th to the 19th. And that one's featuring Eric Roberts. And then the Wales Comic-Con, which is overseas, is happening in Telford on the same weekend, November 18th to the 19th. That one's got Alex Kingston, Paul McGann, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Peter Davison, David Bradley, among others. And then finally, of course, Thanksgiving weekend will be Chicago TARDIS in Chicago, Illinois. That's November 24th and 26th. And that one features Lisa Barrowman, Michael Troughton, who's now portraying the Second Doctor in audios, Colin Baker, Carol Ann Ford, Peter Davison, Fraser Hines, and Sylvester McCoy, among others. Be sure to check that out if you're here in the Chicago area.
And as always, if anybody is going to one of these conventions and would like to act as a roving reporter for Traveling the Vortex, let us know.
Absolutely.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Alison Fitz-Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to Traveling the Vortex, a Direction Point podcast.
All right, well, let's move on to our reviews. This week we are going to start out with the Big Finish Audio Once and Future Time Lord Immorial. This is the 6th entry in the series that they're doing for the year.
Once upon a Gallifrey.
From Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who, Once and Future, Time Lord Immorial. What have you done to my console room?
This is my console room. You're trespassing. You're from an alternate universe. Or rather, you are.
We were friends a long time ago. I've changed a lot since then.
What was that?
Degeneration.
You said degenerating is like a sort of reverse regeneration.
Sand. It's pouring through the walls.
Silicants.
They look like an army.
The sands of time are running out.
And they're starting to march.
Time itself is unraveling.
They're gaining on us.
Talk about quicksand.
Right, here goes.
Wait for me!
Oh my, it can't be.
It is. It's the Hall of the Time Lord Immorial.
The Doctor. Always the Doctor.
Big Finish, for the love of stories.
I'm the Lumiad. Would you mind terribly giving me a hand to save the multiverse?
Slipping between bodies, the Ninth Doctor finds his TARDIS caught between universes as the cosmos start to break down. A doctor from another reality arrives when they join forces with Liv, Chinka, and the Lumiats to find the cause. Someone has desecrated the mythical Hall of the Time Lord Immorial, where the sands of time from the multiverse are held, and those sands are running out.
Really?
Yeah. So not as good. Not as good as.
Not think so?
Not as good as last week. And here's why it gets the dun from me. The performances in this are amazing. Everybody that is in this is on their A game. It is so cool to, number one, hear David Warner again as the alternate Doctor or Unbound Doctor. It actually made me sad that this is the last thing that we're going to get from him. Now, we have other audios that he's done that I really feel like we need to go back and listen to. But it was really a joy to hear him. The interaction between him and the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, just everything surrounding the performance of this was really, really good. The story suffers a little bit partly because we obviously aren't familiar with some of the things that have taken place before this.
Like the Lumiette.
Yeah, like the Lumiette, which I wish I had pushed harder the year of the Master anniversary when Masterful came out. I think we had that on the schedule, then we dropped it off for some reason. And I wish I'd have pushed for this to keep that on the schedule now that I know that that's kind of where that's birthed from. And then, of course, we haven't gotten much audio at all with Liv Chenka, which I think has primarily been an Eighth Doctor companion, right?
She actually started in Missy Volume 2, so we were on our way there. We just never made it because we listened to Volume 1, and then she reappears in Masterful.
Okay, so there you go. But
I'm
right though.
She's characters that we kind of went right up to them, but didn't actually get to them.
But I'm right though. She has been featured in some Eighth Doctor stuff recently, right?
I don't think so. Not according to the TARDIS Wiki.
At least the actress then is playing another character in something else because
she might be.
I've seen her on the cover of that, so of some of those. Yeah, so unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of background on these characters, it falls down. But also, I kind of feel like the story tried to be this really grand multi-universe ending event that feels like a bottle episode. It really feels like everything is being contained in one location. Now, granted, they start with at this beach. There's part of it in the TARDIS, but then it all ends up in this immemorial location, and it's really hard to follow. And it's like a big grand story that they're trying to simplify. And I think that kind of does a detriment to the story because it feels like there could have been more there. They could have broadened it out a little more. It could have been a little more impactful. But because it is one of these anniversary stories that they're just kind of having fun with, I think it kind of becomes a little bit of a letdown from that perspective because I think the story could have been better. I did like, what was it they kept calling it? The Diamond
Array.
Diamond Array. I did think that was a clever thing to put in it. I don't think I understood the Diamond Array at all, but I thought that was kind of clever. But seeing that this is the Diamond Anniversary, it's kind of kitschy, but I think it was a cool ad. And then I think the other thing is I really want to know, they left that cliffhanger with him finding out that the Union was involved in causing the Doctor's regenerations or degenerations. And so leading into that, I kind of felt like we were on that path because at the first, the Doctor's saying, okay, the Union, I'm going to find the Union, blah, blah, blah. And then it's kind of like this diverts us into another direction. We do get a name drop or at least
clarification on what the Union is.
The Lumiette, I think it's the Lumiette. It says that the Union is not a group, it's a person. And so we get a little bit of that, but then we have to put it back on course so that we can obviously wrap this up next month, although technically it's not a wrap up because we've got a coda next year, but this will be the wrap up for the anniversary special. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. I had fun listening to it. I just think that the story was a bit weak and could have been stronger.
Yeah, I think it's a weakness in the fact of that the format. We had to rush through everything and couldn't really explore it. I have some of the same issues with the Lumiette, just in that we didn't have the back knowledge, but it also, at the end of it, implied that she was degenerating also. Yeah. So this was just the Master again, just flitting through her incarnations. It's just we didn't know what this incarnation was. So I feel like it still worked, and I was okay with it by the end of it. It was just while listening to it, I go, well, who is this Lumiette, and why is this the Master? And they did kind of give us enough explanation in the story, especially because Liv needed to know.
Yeah.
They kind of give us context for her character, which it's funny that we had Missy last time and we're talking about how she was possibly on the, road to redemption, and that in that time frame for her, when this is obviously the exact same thing, just a different incarnation doing that. Where it falls down for me more than anything is the resolution of them standing in a circle, holding hands and chanting. Just fixes the problem. I expect a little bit more of a something to resolve it other than to stand with the 4 people that are quote unquote foretold and chant the thing that's been known forever to solve the problem. It just felt like a easy get out of jail free card.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I had a fantastic time listening to it. Hearing Christopher Eccleston and David Warner together was absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And then each of the pairings together was great too. The Ninth Doctor and the Lumiat, David Warner and the Lumiat, Liv with the Ninth Doctor, who obviously knows who she is, so it's later in his timeline than when he left her.
Mm-hmm.
Which obviously I don't know when that is or how that happens, but it does. And then, you know, even David Warner and Liv, I thought had great chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So the writing, I thought, just needed more time to explore the ideas of what's going on in this story.
Both of you are absolutely correct in pretty much all of your points. Certainly the highlight of this one is the cast and the performances that come out of them. David Warner, I've always felt is a worldwide treasure. And so getting more of him as the Doctor is, if anybody should have played the Doctor in live action on TV, that's my pick, you know, because he would have been this good. I really enjoyed hearing Eccleston again, and it's much like the kind of the last one. It's made me quite nostalgic for that era of Who. I was so very intrigued by the character of the Illuminat that I that part of the story still worked for me. Although, as you said, Glenn, I feel like, you know, we did ourselves a disservice by not getting to those other stories beforehand. But now I'm really ready to get to those stories.
Yep.
And honestly, kind of the same with Liv. She was a very engaging companion, and I would like to kind of see, all right, what have you got in store for us in a proper story from your era? Because I'm digging the vibe. So all of that was great. Unfortunately, the plot is, in my mind, very much a letdown. It makes sense in a way that, due to the parallel nature of the Who multiverse, that if the Doctor was struck by a degeneration gun in one, that it would also be affecting him in another. But we never really quite got there.
So can I stop you on that one? Because to that point, I never got the impression that the alternate Doctor was in a degenerative state. Did you, Keith?
There was something at the end that made me think that also. But then he went away fine, so I'm not... No. I take that back. You're right. I did not get that impression. It was only in that one instance when everybody was almost degenerating and no one actually did.
Yeah, right. Because nobody was actually degenerating, but yeah.
Right, because they were in that safe space.
Right. So yeah, Sean, I don't think that the alt Doctor was experiencing the same degenerative states that the Doctor in our universe has.
Well, there were several, I want to say there were about 3 where he kind of was, and, you know, definitely reacting to something that was happening, and then it just stopped.
Well, I think wasn't he reacting to the silicate? Is that what they called the bad guys in this? Or not the bad, they weren't even really bad guys. Yeah. But I think I thought he was reacting to the silicate whenever they were like being overwhelmed by the sand anyway. I thought those were the times that he was reacting to what seemed to be affecting him.
Perhaps.
I could be wrong, but I didn't get that impression from this story that he was. And to be quite honest, there was no real reason for him to be there.
That's the other part of it.
Other than this is between universes.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's just enough of a thread to make it work because, it is between universes. They are between universes. They are essentially trying to save the multiverse or these different multiverses out there. And so it works in that way, but really, I think it was just a way to team I think somebody said, hey, let's team these doctors up. And the other ironic thing about this is Christopher Eccleston, this is his first multi-doctor story, and he has been very vocal about thinking that multi-doctor stories were gimmicky and he didn't like them. Luckily,
unless it's David Warner.
Luckily, they got a really good friend of his and one of his mentors or inspirations anyway, and paired him up that way. So we got him into a multi-doctor story.
Yeah, that's the other part of it is it's David Warner, so I'm not going to complain.
Mm-hmm.
That's just an automatic because I love David Warner. But if you were to pull at that thread, all of a sudden the reason for it being there begins to kind of fall apart. And as good as he was, as good as the chemistry between him and some of the other characters was, I don't think it was as good as, say, when the Jackie story and or in last times when we had the Paternoster gang teaming up. There were much better combinations of people with a much more valid reason for becoming a combo than what we were given here.
Yeah, this kind of lands in the line of like the Fifth Doctor one, where we kind of felt like it was just there to be there. But I think I'm a lot more forgiving on these Once and Future stories because they just. I mean, that's what I expect from an episode, from an anniversary episode anyway, is just some kind of pulling a bunch of, people from the past together and mixing things up and seeing who works with what. I think it, for me, I'm still enjoying these stories, but I agree that this falls into that realm of they just kind of did it to say they could do it. So,
yeah. And I'll freely admit that it may simply be a matter of, oh my goodness, there's a lost David Warner audio out there that we didn't know was coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe my internal expectations were a little too high than for what was actually going on. But the overall plot, I mean, it was a sidestep from, the search for the Union. And it very much felt like it was just thrown in there because we needed to pad out the numbers to get to, the inevitable end point for Once and Future.
Although, listening to the bonus features, it does sound like they didn't plan on this story or Christopher Eccleston, and they said, and he was then interested and available, so they said, okay, let's slip something in.
Yeah, it very much sounded like that. This is exactly why this particular story happened. In fact, that's probably why Planetoid 50 leads us into that tease of, okay, we're coming to the conclusion with mentioning the Union and then pulling away from it for this one and then bringing us back at the end of this one. So that's probably why it was done that way.
And they did make further attempts besides the Union to connect it. The fact that the whatever degeneration weapon supposedly includes these sands of time,
right,
was a good connecting thread. Although it felt like a repetitive connecting thread, since I thought something else, was part of this degeneration weapon. Did they cover that previously?
They did. It was in the. Well, let's see. The Fifth Doctor was looking for the weapon, or looking for an element of the weapon, but I don't think he found it. But then it was
the Sixth Doctor.
The Sixth Doctor, when the one with Harry, and Harry is there first to buy the whatever that device was before the Doctor got there.
But didn't that wind up being a misdirection, that it wasn't actually part of it? It was just something else that can do it.
Yeah, you're right. It was.
So I guess this
thing. Yeah,
at least explains what it is, or what's included in it. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to see where they go from here, because I mean, I think one of the things that Sean expressed, and I kind of have that sentiment as well, is we've got this, we're calling this Once and Future, and really all we've done is string together a bunch of different fun stories. I think if the ends justify the means, meaning this last story ends up being really, really good, and sort of ties everything back together in a neat little way, I think I'll be a lot more pleased with it, but I certainly haven't hated the ride. So
I don't want to give the impression that I hated it. I just, this particular story, there's an episode of G.I. Joe where the Joes and Cobra are fighting and they wind up in the Temple of Osiris, and literally go on a supernatural metaphysical journey where they meet the gods. And the whole exercise feels like, what? Just because it's so far out of left field. And that's kind of what this one reminded me of, because we get a little bit of Time Lord Immorial. He's a god. He's, it's a myth. It's something that doesn't really exist. And yet here we are. But none of those reactions seemed big enough to warrant the fact that here we are. You know what I mean? When Big Finish has done things like Zagreus or, kind of set up these mythical impossibilities, there's always a much bigger brouhaha about it. And, understandably, we only have an hour and we've got to get going. But it just, nobody really delivered the wow factor for me that we are standing here in this place that shouldn't exist. And they just rolled with it a little too quickly for me. Mm-hmm. And then once we get to the actual sands of time running out, as Keith said, well, we're going to join hands and sing Kumbaya and that'll fix it. It's like, okay, you've already kind of stretched my believability on this one, because as I've said before, I like a little more science in my Doctor Who than whatever we've got going on here. And now it's prophesized, and there is no scientific basis behind it. It just works, and it's all right. Overall, you put all these little things together that just didn't work up with the plot, and I really kind of was super disappointed that this was the last David Warner story. It just, I really am trying to hold on to the performance parts of it that I liked, but plot wise, it didn't do anything for me at all. Mm-hmm. It just didn't work. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, but yeah, not for me.
Well, like I say, they're going to wrap it up later this month. Actually, I think the next one comes out later this month, so they'll wrap it up.
And as you said, there's always hope. Maybe something will come together, and we'll go, oh.
Probably not, but
I'm kind of.
I'm hopeful, but probably not. Well, let's move on to our next review. We're actually reviewing a book as well this week. We're reviewing The Timeless Adventures, the unofficial story of how Doctor Who conquered television. This is written by Brian J. Robb and comes to us from our friends at Polaris Publishing.
I do.
Let's hear it.
Opening with an in-depth account of the creation of the series within the BBC of the early 1960s, this investigation tackles each decade of the show through a unique political, pop culture, and historical viewpoint, exploring the links between contemporary Britain and the stories Doctor Who told, as well as how such links kept the show popular. Chapters range from discussions on the cultural and political relevance of monsters like the Daleks and the Cybermen. The book also addresses the late 1980s cancellation of the show and ways in which narrowly focused, dedicated fandom contributed to the show's demise, yet was also instrumental in its regeneration for the 21st century under Russell T Davies. Lastly, this critical history analyzes the new series to reveal what has made it so popular and how much it reflects real-world issues such as consumerism and dieting.
Keith, you want to go first?
Sure. I thought this was a very thorough book, and it did a really good job kind of especially diving into the early 60s time frame of how the show was made. And like I said, lots of details throughout all of that. And then I felt like it kind of started glossing over things once it kind of got into the later part of Tom Baker's run. It felt like the transition to John Nathan Turner, the author felt like he got more critical of what was happening as opposed to being more factual. Especially when it came to the Sixth Doctor and the Seventh Doctor, it felt like he just glossed over most of that while touching on aspects. And I know that it seemed like a lot of his focus was looking at the parallels in the real world examples of where they were pulling the story ideas from.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that that time frame in the 80s didn't do that as often, but it felt like he still didn't quite dedicate the same amount of time exploring other aspects of the show.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's where that falls down, is he does throughout the early part of the book and the later part of the book, especially in the New Who era, he does seem to make parallels between political and social and things that are, happening in the real world and how they're being reflected on television in these stories. But you're right. He really kind of has this hole in the middle where he almost doesn't feel like it seems like he doesn't have much to write about other than just kind of factual information, and he makes the comment that during the JNT
he goes
years,
to great lengths to point that out.
Well, the JNT years stepped away from that political commentary. They stepped away from that social commentary. And so I think that that's where the middle feels kind of empty, because it feels like he's talking about one thing here, and then in the middle he just feels like he doesn't have a lot to say. So he glosses over, he makes digs at JNT and then glosses over everything else before getting into New Who. So I would agree that was kind of one of the things that I was a little disappointed with.
It almost felt like the middle section was ghostwritten, because the beginning is so in depth and really pretty fascinating. It's a dry read, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of background stuff in the beginning chapters, stories that I didn't know.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of information out there that was new to me, which as a Doctor Who fan is like, cool. And then, as Keith pointed out, suddenly we get to this middle section and it becomes very almost clickbaity, where it's the same stories that if you were to ask somebody and they say, well, fandom doesn't like this era because it kind of felt like they were just regurgitating those talking points. There was nothing new there. There was nothing unusual, and almost like a Google search says that fans don't like this era, so I'm going to write that we don't like this era and move on. And I kind of felt like it just fell off so much during that middle part. But then, fortunately, yes, it did pick back up again a little bit with New Who toward the end.
It finally almost felt like he discovered a crutch, which was a very interesting crutch, in my opinion, of the allegories between what was happening in the real world and what was happening on the show. Those sections I thought were absolutely fascinating, and I loved reading them. But I wanted the same sort of dedication put into exploring the stories that we got during the JNT era. And obviously this author didn't like that time frame, because later he obviously liked the Matt Smith era, and that didn't have as many allegories, but he still dedicated a heavy amount of time focusing on the Matt Smith run and Moffat's run. So it felt like there was too much of his own bias in this story, in this book, especially later on when it felt like he was targeting Jodie Whittaker and her acting when he didn't address the acting of any other actor previously. And maybe I'm not plugged into fandom enough to know that a lot of people complained about her acting.
Yeah.
I heard the complaints of, the writing's not as good or the stories aren't as good. I never really heard many complaints about her acting not being up to snuff. And so I was a little shocked to read that section of the book and felt like it was a biased opinion when most of the book was more based on fact and historical knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the complaints about I've heard the complaints about Jodie's acting, but I've always chalked them up to that one particular section of fandom that I just don't want to give any stock to, because I didn't agree with it and I don't see it. But I think, an actor can only do the best of what they can with what they're given. And so for me, it was always, falling back down on the story stuff. And you're right, that part of it almost felt personal,
Which is really interesting too, because it felt like he went to great lengths to defend Chibnall.
Yeah.
And the reasons why he had so many issues and why his stories weren't quite as good.
I don't think that he went to great lengths to
maybe not great lengths.
Yeah, but I think that he does defend, or the book does defend Chibnall somewhat to a point, and some of the choices that he made. And so, yeah, I was kind of the same way. It was almost like he wasn't a fan of Jodie, but he also was fan of Chibnall, or at least an apologist for Chibnall. And so, that does come across in the book. I found all of that very interesting.
I hate knowing the struggles Chibnall was going through. Sorry,
I hate to say that a writer has a bias in something, especially when he's listed his source materials, rather methodically in the back. And so a lot of this now, I think what doesn't come across is where the research is coming from, because he makes comments in the books that fandom as a whole felt this way. It wasn't so much like he doesn't break it down enough to say there were areas of fandom that felt this way. There were areas of fandom that felt this way. It's almost like he paints this overall picture of all of fandom. This is how fandom felt. And I think I think even Doctor Who fans, when you're looking at the history of Doctor Who, get into that sort of oversimplifying the feelings of fandom at that time. And I think that unfortunately is what he does here. This book is, aside from the things that we've said that are wrong with it, I think the book, if being fans of Doctor Who, I felt, unfortunately, we know a lot of the information that's in this book. And I'm with Sean. I think I picked up on a few more things. That's one of the things that I think the beginning of the book does really well, is there's sort of this mythology that has come up surrounding Doctor Who. And part of it is from the movie Adventures in Space and Time. And because they took some poetic liberties with it. But there is this mythology of how things kind of came about. And a lot of it is put at the feet of Verity Lambert. And I'm not saying that she wasn't integral in Doctor Who. She is basically the mother of Doctor Who. She's the reason why Doctor Who was a success and continued on. But there were a lot of people involved in this show getting it together and getting it started before she even took over. And I like that the book addresses that and gives you some of these players that were there creating the foundation of what the show was going to be before it became what it was. And so that was really interesting to hear a lot of that backstory. Once we get into the story of the show being on air, I really feel like as Doctor Who fans, we know a lot of this information. And even glossing over a lot of the middle era of this, I really felt like, yeah, you're hitting on all the talking points that I know. And so I was really enjoying the comparisons to the political aspects of how things were being reflected in the times on the show. And that was really cool. And so, yeah, it kind of feels empty in the middle. But he does explain that because there is a step away from that, as you said, Keith, he's using a crutch, and albeit a good crutch, he's using a crutch. And so when you get to a point where you don't have the analogy that he's used to in writing this, it's just not there. So I guess I can forgive a little bit for that glossing over, although that's an era that I, grew up watching Doctor Who and really am more interested and fascinated in. But
I feel like there could have been lots of stories to mine in that area, because that, while he glossed, there was a lot of interesting stuff there that he talked about. The idea that, the general populace started turning away from the show because of the correlation, potentially because of the correlation of the backstory, continuity heavy things that were happening in the show at the time, is absolutely fascinating. I didn't know any of that, and seeing the numbers, the fact that he provided viewing figures for each episode whenever he talked about them, I didn't really pay attention to the viewing figures with Whitaker's run, but seeing those numbers, I can't deny that. And being able to go back and see what those numbers were in the 80s and see them go downhill and posit the idea that, well, this could potentially be why, I thought is a valid and interesting exploration. I just wanted some additional exploration of the stories that actually happened too.
I think also even though it gets, and I think what adds to the dryness is all of the numbers when we're talking about viewing figures. Every time a viewing figure came up, I kept thinking, oh, here's another one. So it feels like it's very heavy throughout the book. However, I completely agree that he does a good job of illustrating the ups and downs of the show by using those viewing figures, because he's absolutely right. It's when he's making comparisons about the dips in the show and how, it's not being as successful and the masses are turning away, as you said, kind of in that mid run. And by showing those viewing figures, it's almost kind of supports what he's talking about in those areas as well. So I did appreciate all those viewing numbers being in there, because it does work that way. I think the other thing that I thought was interesting is he does focus a little bit more on the Hinchcliffe era, on the Gothic thrills, as the title of that chapter is. I think he does do a good job of kind of focusing on what was happening there. Also because he's able to kind of gleam onto some of the things, the social commentary that's happening in the show as well. But I think when we get into the new era, I think maybe because the social commentary is more obvious to me, this is why I may feel this way. But there's sometimes life influences art, and sometimes art is coincidentally connected to something that's going on. And there are a lot of times in this book where I kind of felt like, was the intent of the creators of that episode or the writer of that episode, were they being influenced by political and social events? There's some that are very obvious, but there's some that he was making connections to that I kind of felt like, that might have just been coincidental. And I wish I could remember a specific example, but there were times, especially in the New Who era, where I think he was trying too hard to connect the social and political atmosphere or climate to the episodes that were being presented to us.
Weren't there even some instances in the book where he said, well, the author didn't say that there was this connection, or that it wasn't inspired by this, but... Right,
exactly. And so he felt like he was drawing too heavy on trying to continue to make those connections, where I kind of felt like, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying here. That does look that way, but I don't know that it was intentional, So that was one of the things that I took away from it. I was like, I'm not sure that's...
It was almost as if a grad student was working on their final thesis and had a fantastic hook at the beginning that then they couldn't quite find enough corroborating stuff to continue on throughout it, and just kind of winged it. I mean... I don't want to take anything away from it, because, as I said, there's a lot of information in this book.
I think,
and these stories before, but there was a veritable fountain of stuff that, okay, that's, just there were a bunch of little nuggets throughout the thing that, made it worth reading. And it just, at times, it was a bit of a chore to unearth those nuggets in the mountain of other stuff.
To be quite honest with you, as a fan and knowing a lot of this stuff, I don't know that I got as much out of it as if I were to give this book to a casual fan or somebody, a newcomer. I think that there is a wealth of knowledge here. I think even though there's a lot of feels like there's a lot of personal input from the author on this, I really think there is a wealth of knowledge here for somebody new to the show, or just even a casual fan that doesn't know the history, like more of, like us more diehard types that have just heard these stories years and years and years. So I think the book is good in that aspect, because I think it really captures, I think it is a snapshot of the last 60 years and how it came from one point to the latest, to the 60th anniversary. I think he does a good job of overall giving you a picture of how Doctor Who started and survived on television, and then didn't survive so much, but then, was able to regain that momentum. So I think the book does a good job in that, and I would recommend it to somebody that's new and doesn't have all this foreknowledge of in the background. The other thing I took away from me, it was kind of nice reading this in the 60th anniversary year, because it was kind of a step, even though I knew a lot of this stuff, it was kind of a step back through the years. I kind of felt like a nostalgic romp through history. And so from that point of view, I enjoyed that much of it as well.
And let's be fair to the book too, because I think we aren't the target audience for the book. Right. It is the casual fan. Right. So the fact that we have so much knowledge about the show already is going to be to the book's detriment, because we will be kind of just skimming those sections because we know it so well.
Right. And we're going to pick it apart, because unfortunately, when you have a thirst for more information that you don't know and you don't feel like you get it, then you're more apt to kind of put something down, and it's not necessarily the fault of the author. It's more of the fault of the reader, because we're wanting to get more out of it than maybe is being presented.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking to that nostalgia part of it, that was one of the things I really enjoyed about it, was the stepping through of the eras of, and this story is going on and talking about each one kind of a little bit, and me going, oh yeah, that was a great story. That makes me want to go rewatch that. And then going on to the next thing of, oh yeah, that was great. I want to rewatch that now. And, building up my rewatch list because of stepping through this book and the history of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as you pointed out with, the kind of wide swath paintbrush of fandom, we're just as guilty of that. I mean, we've gone back and reviewed things and said, well, fandom seems to think that Talons of Wen-Chiang is just an absolute masterpiece. Well, I'm sure not all fandom thinks that way.
Like
we certainly don't.
Right.
So, we're guilty of it as well.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, I think that there were some of those instances within the book too, that it wasn't phrased as much of fandom, or fandom thinks this story is phenomenal. It just stated this phenomenal story. Well, I didn't think it was phenomenal. It was okay. Not great. And so that's where some of those biases I felt came in.
Sure. Yeah.
Going back to Hinchcliffe real quick, I think another reason why he spent so much time focusing on that was all the Mary Whitehouse stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. It did give a reason to connect it to what was socially happening at that time. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it really
Which
is.
Which was interesting.
It really is the J&T era that I think he's a lot more disparaging to, and feels a lot more empty. But then again, as he admits in the book, they stepped away from that political commentary. And when you're writing a book, and that's your thing, that's the element that you're carrying through in this book, and you get to a zone here, there's not much to do. I suppose maybe and we should say Brian J. Robb is the author of this book. I don't know if we've mentioned that. And I think that maybe Robb has probably decided that rather than, although there maybe does feel like there might be some personal bias in there, maybe he felt like rather than trying to switch gears on how the book is being presented, maybe because he knew he was going to go back to the social commentary element for the new series, I wonder if maybe that it was probably for the best that he kind of glossed over. Maybe that's unfortunately what happens in that, section of the book, because there's not a lot of to talk about what, comparing it to what was happening in society. So.
What's also interesting is that he kind of skips and jumps around some of RTD's era too. It didn't feel like he really talked too much in detail about David Tennant's time on the show. Like he talked about like the cultural and how it's reached, new popular highs, but it didn't feel like there was as much exploration of the stories of that era too.
Mm-hmm.
Which I would think there would be more.
And I guess he's written like 77 books in all. He's done biographies on Leonardo DiCaprio, Johnny Depp, Brad Pitt. He's written books about Star Wars movies, superheroes, gangsters, Walt Disney. So he's certainly a pop culture writer. He must know his stuff. And I guess he's co-editor of the Sci-Fi Bulletin website, so I guess he's probably a Doctor Who fan as well, and lives in Edinburgh. So, there may be some bias in there. And then again, he's got an extensive source.
Clearly has a lot of knowledge.
He has an extensive source list at the back of this book, and so he's obviously done his research. So, personal bias aside, he's at least got the. He cited his sources for a lot of the information that he's put in this book. Anything else on this book?
As you said, it's a pretty nifty little retrospective of the eras leading up to the 60th, and kind of a nice way to get a recap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we want to thank Polaris Publishing Limited for allowing us to get a copy of this book for us to review. All right, well, Sean, what do we got coming up on the schedule?
Well, coming up next, we continue with our 60th anniversary tie-in materials with the finale of Doomsday, and that will take place over a 3-part Big Finish audio and the final part across the Doctor Who digital channels and social media. Then we've got an anniversary special for a 60th anniversary tie-in. How about a look back at the anniversary specials through the years, including 30 Years in the TARDIS, a documentary about the first half of the last 60.
Which technically we're going to review more than 30 Years in the TARDIS, because that's what's available to us, which is actually the same thing, but it has an extended version that was created in 1993. So,
yes.
Or it was extended version of the 1993 special, I guess I should say.
Yes. Yeah, 93 was the 30th. And then Doctor Who Redacted has returned for a second season, and we will be covering that as well. And then if all goes well, we will be delving in with another Fun and Games episode with a look at the new Cubicle 7 role-playing game, Doctors and Daleks.
I am so excited to get
into
that.
We are very grateful to our new friends at Cubicle 7 for assisting us with that one.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you can find us on our website, travelingthevortex.com. If you get any value out of this podcast, why not consider putting some value back into it? You can do that by becoming a patron and click on that Patreon link and support us there. When you become a patron of the podcast, you unlock more audios and specials from us. And if you could just give at least $1 a month, that would help us keep the lights on here at Traveling the Vortex. Also, please consider giving us a 5-star review wherever you subscribe to the podcast. And be sure to check us out on the various social medias. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. We're on Instagram, and we're on TikTok. Anything else we need to touch on before we close this one? If not, until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.